am thrilled to be back, Hope City. This is one of my favorite places on the planet, and the McGrews are among my favorite people in the world. So I don't live here. I only come here when I'm in the area, but I feel like this is a church home for me. So thank you. And kudos to the 7 poets. That's extraordinary. Yeah. Who are those 7? Perfect number. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. We bore witness. We witnessed this. Maybe we're all going to be singing this across the world next year. So, thank you. I actually invented an acronym tonight, FIMA. It's like FOMO, FIMO, but it's like FOMO, fear of missing out, fear I missed out. I was going to go to that workshop, and I'm just so old I get tired. I know, and I said to Jen, I write a lot, but I've never been able to write a song, and now I think that the Shekinah of the Lord was there, and it might have turned out okay. Well, so good. Again, it's lovely to be back. Jen, tell me the drop dead time, because that's how I work best. Just tell me. No, just say stop at this point. Tell me when to stop. Okay. I do have some books out there. Not all of them. I don't have. I've sold out some of the stock. But if you're interested, but the one I want to highlight, it came out about a month ago, and it's a book that, all of them are labors of love, but this one particularly, it's called What Is Left of the Night. And it's a novel, a World War II novel, which is not my area. Like, I'm not a historian, and I'm certainly no expert in World War II, but got deeply drawn to a story about a little village in southeastern France that about 900 people, and during the war, this is a true story. Is this going in and out, or we're good? Okay, all right. During World War II, while the shadow of the Nazism was spreading across Europe, this little village, under the direction of a pastor, a Protestant pastor, André Trocmé, and his wife Magda, decided they were going to defy the Nazis and rescue Jews. And this tiny little village of 900 people rescued over 2,500. It's an extraordinary historical story, and I've fell in love with this village and the people about 25 years ago, and then started visiting this place. In fact, I was living there during COVID and had to leave. Can you imagine being in the south of France and having to go back to Alberta winter? Anyhow, it happened. But I spent about 6 years in researching this book and going back and forth to the village, meeting some of the survivors. I fell in love with the story, I fell in love with the people, and I decided the only thing, I'm not a historian, so I thought the only thing I think I could sort of bring this story alive is to put it into a novel form. And so it's a pretty rip-roaring story. It's those who have read it said, it's one of those things you just have to sort of read another chapter. But it's also a profound story of Christian sacrifice and Christian witness in dark times, in ideological times, actually, which is what we're living in now. We're not living in an age of ideas anymore, because that's interesting. An age of ideology is where you're forced to believe certain things, or you're an enemy. And this is not the gospel. And so this incredible pastor and his amazing wife decided, to heck with that, we're going to do the opposite. And we're going to, instead of the ideology of Nazism, we're going to live out the gospel of Matthew 25. You came to me hungry, you came to me naked, you came to me, you were in prison, and I treated you like Jesus. So anyhow, what is left of the night? Enough of that. Oh, I want to make a comment about Ray. I don't know where that guy. That guy's not from here. Well, no, but he's not like no. He's like from the deep past or the unimagined future, or Middle Earth or something. Like he's not from here, right? Like I've written 3 books of David. I teach a whole course on David. He said like 58 things about David I've never thought or heard before, and they're like, what? How did I miss that? So, the guy was like scary, prophetic and bright, and that was amazing. Thank you. The whole day was great. Like I so enjoyed you and Jake talking about. It was just a ton of wisdom, and then him, and then the afternoon with these incredible young leaders. Or I wish I'm old, but I mean, some of you are sort of probably near my age. I'm in my 60s, but thinking, I never knew all that when I was their age. Right? It's so cool, you know. Can you put Ephesians 1:18? I think I called for it up there. I forgot my Bible too, so I'll have to read it off my phone, but I'm terrible at that. I pray, this is Paul, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened or opened, as he says, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. This is Apostle Paul. I have become fascinated of late with how many times Paul talks about seeing, because that's his story. Here's a guy who thought he had perfect vision when he was a Pharisee, and he couldn't see for looking. He could not see a person. He talked about an ideological bent. He could only see what he wanted to see, and if you didn't fit the mold, he on principle hated you. He thought he could see, but he was blind. He was like Simon the Pharisee in that story of Luke 7, where Jesus, Simon the Pharisee, that's where the woman comes in, crashes the party, washes Jesus' hair with her tears and dries them with her hair. And the inner dialogue or inner monologue of Simon the Pharisee is presented, and it's almost like that's probably what Paul was like, because all he's thinking is, ew, if he knew who this woman was. He thinks he sees so well. And what does Jesus ask that little Pharisee? Hey, Simon, do you see this woman? You can't see for looking. So Paul goes from this belief that he's the clearest minded, keenest eyed guy in the universe to this, what does Jesus do in order to kind of reorder him as he knocks him blind? And then a painful recovery. Adonai's praise for him. It's like scales coming off his eyes. That's got to hurt. That's like your nails being peeled off or something. And then every time Paul wants to talk about what God's doing, he usually uses vision language. One of the ones I'll talk about in my 3 talks, including the one I'll do Sunday morning, is 2 Corinthians, where he says, we no longer look at anyone from a worldly point of view. We used to look at Jesus that way, but we don't do that anymore. And then he goes on to say, everybody out there, that the way we see them is somebody that God is utterly in love with. So in love that he gave his only son, that he would die for them, that they could have this new life. And this passage, Ephesians, is this not going in and out? Is that just me? It is? What do I do? Like, how do I be saved? I feel like I'm doing something wrong. Like, okay, all right. But you singers know how to make it work, right? Like you just keep going. Okay, just keep talking. Fantastic. Okay. Right here? Okay. You'd think I'd know how to use these things after a few years of doing this. I pray, Paul says, that the eyes of your heart are opened. Here's what Jesus wants to do with all of us, but I'm talking to people who are involved in some capacity in the worship ministry of the church. He wants to move us from, thank you. He wants to move us from mere sight to vision. From just seeing to really seeing. I have a theory that Paul loved most. This is only a theory. I'll check it out in a few years when I go to heaven. But the theory is that Paul loved, he would love the stories in the Gospels. And the ones that I think he loved most were the stories of the Jesus healing blind people. I can picture Paul, but by the way, Paul probably all through his life suffered from actually poor eyesight. Like physically, he probably never really, that's why he says, what's the letter? He says, look at what great big letters I'm writing in. Like, it's like, Paul. And there's some scholars that think when he talks about the thorn aside in 2 Corinthians, he's actually talking about glaucoma or something, his fading eyesight. Who knows? But Paul went from somebody who thought he saw to somebody who Jesus struck blind to somebody whom Jesus restored his sight to this man of just transcendent vision. I mean, he even says, I saw heaven. And that's the move he makes with all of us. So I think Paul just loved those stories of Jesus coming and some guy making a racket out in the street. He's in Jericho or whatever, and he's hollering, Jesus, come. And everybody's saying, be quiet. And Jesus said, no, what does that guy want? Bring him over. And they, cheer up, come on over, he's calling you, and run up. And Jesus says, what do you want? I want to see. Oh yeah, we can do that. I think Paul treasured those stories. Here's one, though, I think that might have puzzled him when he was new in his faith. Sometimes we don't think that Paul actually had a growth trajectory like the rest of us. But there's lots of evidence that he did. That it took him a while to sort of shake off his Pharisaism, his anger, some of the narrow ways he thought, some of his reaction, some of his hubris, actually his arrogance. There's lots of evidence in his early Christian years he was a bit up on himself, and later on he had sort of a more humble opinion of who he was. But here's a story that when he was a young Christ follower, I think he may have found puzzling, and then later found maybe his go-to story. You know what? I don't know how to use my own phone, it seems. Do you have the Mark 8 passage up there? So this is Mark chapter 8, verse 22. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eye and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people that look like trees walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were open, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, don't even go into the village. The reason I think this might have puzzled the Apostle Paul in the early stages is, doesn't it just take one touch, Sydney, to get your eyes restored? Isn't there story after story? Jesus just says a word, he touches the eyes, or uses spittle or mud or something, and it's just done. And isn't that probably Paul's experience? Is I was blind, but now I see. I was this little raging Pharisee, and he knocked me blind, and then sent Ananias, and he prayed, the scales fell, and now I see. I think in his early years, you think it only took one touch. Didn't you think that in your early years? I mean, I remember my first couple years of being a Christian, and it was extraordinary how Jesus transformed my ways of seeing. Like everything looked utterly new. The world glowed, it shimmered in a fresh way. People, I saw the beauty of people that I'd never noticed before. I saw the beauty of creation. It was like utterly new. And it took me a couple of years to realize, but there's still some distortion. Touch me again, spit again, Jesus. I need another touch. And most of us can identify that those early years of coming to faith were radiant, but we kind of needed a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and et cetera touch as Jesus moves us from sight to vision. I think that Paul, it's all a guess, didn't understand this story when he first came to faith. I think by the time he was old, he got this very well, that Jesus came and touched his eyes many times, and he kept seeing more and more and more. Well, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about that tonight, and then tomorrow morning, and then again, if you're around, I'll pick it up on Sunday morning again. Touch my eyes again. Keep moving me from sight to vision. The church father Irenaeus said that the definition of a disciple is they have grace-healed eyes. Grace-healed eyes. And I have to say, I've been a Christ follower for, 45 years I've been following Jesus. And I know that there's still more grace healing needed in how I see as he moves me from vision to sight. This is really crucial if you're leading worship, because especially this Ephesians, can we go back to Ephesians 1:18 again? I pray that the eyes of your heart might be opened or enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which is called you, that you yourself are deeply grounded in the gospel story. But listen to this next line. The riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people. You have to, we heard this today over and over, you have to love the people. You have to truly see the people whom you're ministering and leading. That you might see the glory. God's got all his wealth in you. His glorious inheritance in the holy people. He's actually, if God made an investment, it's all here. It's all right here. You know, he doesn't use a bank. He doesn't invest in weird stocks. He just says, there's actually a story of St. Lawrence in the 2nd century when persecuted church was utterly being ravaged by persecution, and the Roman emperor at the time was absolutely convinced that the church was hoarding wealth, and so they sent the soldiers to he was a high deacon in the church near Rome, and the emperor sent this guy that says, you've got to bring all the wealth to my feet. And so what does he do? He goes and gathers all the people of the church and brings them forth. And the emperor comes out and goes, what the heck is this? And he says, you asked for all the wealth. The glorious inheritance of God's holy people. But it's sometimes well hidden, isn't it? Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Move me from sight to vision. Let me not just see this person. Let me see what you are doing in their life. Let me see even now their destiny. C.S. Lewis has this marvelous line in the little essay called the Eternal Weight of Glory. And he says, there's no ordinary people. Everyone you meet, he says, is somebody who, if you could actually see who they were, you would be tempted to fall down and worship. Such is the glory. And he says every conversation we have is basically helping them along toward that destiny or not. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord, that I may see the glorious, my hope, my own hope, that I am anchored deeply in the gospel. I am saved. I am not living somehow this random, flailing life trying to figure out its meaning. You don't have to figure, you know what? You don't have to figure out the meaning of life. It's been given to you. You're just all you need to figure out is, how do I join God in what he's already doing on this earth? That's it. You don't have to fill it. What a burden on people who don't know God. They have to go figure out the meaning of life. Can you imagine, Greg? Like, what an awful thing to try. Like, stress, and then, what if you get it wrong? Which a lot of people seem to are on that quest. You don't have to figure out the meaning of life. It's already been given to you. All you do is, how do I align myself with your purposes in my generation? Yeah, it's the David thing. So, moving us from sight to vision. This story in chapter 8 of the blind man who takes two goes at it to, see everything. It is structurally, thematically, and theologically the epicenter of the Gospel of Mark. It's dead center. Structurally, so in the architecture of Mark, the Gospel of Mark is right at the middle. I think if you actually counted the verses, I think it's pretty much equal on one side and the other side. It's right at the center structurally. Thematically, it is, because Mark is very much about the story of learning who Jesus is and our eyes being open. And theologically is, because that's the heart of discipleship, as I've already said, that you would see everything. If you look at how Mark progresses, early on the disciples they've been recruited by Jesus, they've been called by Jesus, they're going around doing stuff with Jesus, and they're clued out about Jesus. So one of the early stories in Mark chapter 4, and we'll look at this on Sunday morning, is they're going across the Sea of Galilee, and a big storm comes up, and these fishermen get terrified, have to wake up the carpenter. And he just gets up and he calms everything down. And they have a question. The disciples who have already been recruited by Jesus and traveling with Jesus have a question. Who is this? Did you know he could do that? Who is this? So the disciples don't see. Right after the story in Mark 8, where the man is touched once and twice, that's where Jesus turns around and says to his disciples, who do people say I am? They're like, somebody say this is. What about you? Who do you say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. In other words, the disciples have gone from, I don't know who he is, to a declaration of you are the Messiah. And then at the very end, right near the very end of John's Gospel, a Roman centurion, when he sees the temple curtain torn in two, declares, he makes a proclamation, surely this was the Son of God. So we go from disciples not having a clue to the chief disciple, Peter, making the declaration. We'll see tomorrow morning, but he's still not seeing quite clearly. At that point, he needs a second touch himself. To the end that Rome, the oppressor, and also representative of the world, are proclaiming Jesus is the Son of God. From not seen to sort of seen to seen. That's the whole structure of the Gospel of Mark, with his story right as the centerpiece, the hinge piece of it. So what I want to talk about, in my remaining time tonight, I want to talk about a fresh scene of yourself. Jesus is moving you from not seeing to sight to vision about you. And then tomorrow morning I'm going to talk about seeing him more clearly, And then on Sunday, if you're here, I'm going to talk about seeing others more clearly. The reason I'm starting with you is because I actually think, I don't know, it's a chicken and egg thing. Do we have to really see Jesus until we see ourselves, or see ourselves before we see Jesus? I don't know. But here's something that's curious. In the story of Paul, I think he actually had to have a revelation of his own brokenness before he could actually see Christ. I think that he was incapable. I mean, he knew of Christ. He'd heard of Christ. He must have known enough doctrine about Christ because he kind of made himself an expert on the early church. I think he was chock-a-block full about stuff about Christ, but couldn't see Christ for looking. And there's something about coming into a revelation of his own need that released him into actually seeing Christ for who he is. There's this. I'm gonna tomorrow morning talk about the transfiguration, but in Luke's version of the transfiguration, only in Luke. There's this wonderful verse, Luke 9:32, and it says that Peter and James and John are watching Jesus being, or they haven't seen Jesus transfigured. It says that they were very sleepy. This is Luke's gospel. They were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, then they could see Jesus. And they saw his glory. Does that transpose at all into your life? That sometimes you're so sleepy, you're so clued out, that even if Jesus was shining before you, you wouldn't see him. You have to wake up. At any rate, I'm going to talk about seeing yourself more clearly. It's the nature of Jesus to reveal us to ourselves. And the fundamental thing Jesus wants to do is actually reveal to you that your profound need for him and what we just were singing about, his unending love for you. Your profound need for him and his unending love for you. In the Gospel of Mark, this is tracking with a lot of the synoptics, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But in the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus is baptized, chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, it's just told in two verses. Mark 1, 10, 11. When Jesus is baptized, it says, and the heavens were torn open. It's very strong language. It's like God ripping the heavens open. And the Father says, this is my Son whom I love, with him I'm well pleased. Or you are my Son. And a voice from heaven, you are my Son, yeah, whom I love. You're good. Fantastic. So it's torn open. In chapter 2, so Jesus then goes from there into the desert, comes out of the desert 40 days later, and starts the ministry. The very first thing he does in his ministry, he goes to a church, but then he goes to Capernaum, and in chapter 2 is the story of the people who break the roof open, and they lower the man through. And the language, though most translations don't quite capture it, but the language is almost identical. When they open the roof, it says they tore it open. It's almost the same as God tearing open the heavens. These people tear open the roof. And then the man's lowered down. And what's the very first thing Jesus says to this man on a gurney who's paralyzed? And the very first thing he says is, son. Not your sins are forgiven or you're healed, but he says, son. We go a little further along, and in chapter 5, there's that woman who pushes her way through the crowd. She's been bleeding for 12 years. Nobody can help her. She spent all her money. She's desperate. She's thinking, if I could just get a hold of his robe, maybe nobody would notice. And she grabs hold of the robe, and he's like, Jesus, okay, what just happened here? Somebody touched me. And Peter's like, well, you're in a crowd. Everybody did. No. Very different. It's very different. This one meant it. This one meant it. This one needed something. This one was desperate. Who is that? And finally she just, okay, I'm sorry, it was me. First word out of Jesus' mouth is daughter. Do you see that what Jesus does is he has heard the voice of the Father, you are my son, and then he's gone on a naming mission. And he's just going around, he's saying like everyone, daughter, 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 son, son, daughter, son, daughter. It's just a naming mission. And it's interestingly the people that nobody are thinking about as sons and daughters. Think about that woman who's grabbing the hem of a robe. In fact, that story is paired with the story of Jairus, the synagogue leader, whose little 12-year-old daughter, little princess, is dying, and he's like, you gotta come, my daughter, my princess is dying. And Jesus gets interrupted by this woman who's had, 12 years, the same. Probably the day that girl was born, she got this affliction. She's had it forever. This is a chronic problem. Just leave it, like, come back another day, lady. And nobody's thought about her as a daughter in a long time. You see, Jesus is on a naming mission. And Jesus' heart is to actually look at you. And I met you last night, Bailey, and say, Bailey, my daughter. Yeah. Daughter, here. Everybody, and whether you think of yourself as the daughter or not, Jesus does. He's on a naming mission. And it's the same language. I bet she said it in exactly the same tone as the Father said it to him. So Jesus wants you to see, very quickly, there's 3 call stories in the early part of Mark's gospel, all about calling disciples. And the first one is in chapter 1, verses 16 through 20. I'm not going to read it, but the 3 call stories go like this. The first call story is Jesus calls some fishermen. And the emphasis of that is like, they're just guys doing their job. They're guys out at the seashore. They didn't see this coming. They're, pumping gas. They're doing their IT. They're, at their sales job or whatever. They just did not see this coming. And Jesus says these incredible words, just come and follow me. And they just drop everything and follow him. Here's the emphasis of that story. Jesus isn't picking people because they're elite. I don't think he despises the elite. He just doesn't need them. He's actually just picking ordinary people. You know that phrase, you've got this? I don't like it, and I'll tell you why. I usually don't. What I need to know is somebody's got this. I'd like to know Jesus got this. Like, I don't need to create some sort of false sense of my own prowess. Don't send, like, Billy, you're a daughter, but also you're ordinary, and this is good news. Because you don't have to perform. You don't have to impress anybody. Just be you. That beautiful image that Ray gave, like you just get in your boat and let the wind catch it and just let the Spirit take you where the Spirit's take. I just love that I'm actually ordinary. You have never met a more ordinary human than Mark Buchanan, except maybe yourself. And here's why. The fact that I have written all these books is the biggest prank that God played on humanity. I was a solid C student, like all the way through. I was such a bad student that if I brought home a C+, we'd all go out for pizza. Now, we weren't Asian, in case you had to guess, because that wouldn't happen in most Asian homes. If you brought home a C+, you would have to bring up the grade significantly. But no, it was like days of celebration in the Buchanan household. If I got once I brought a B, and it was like, this was like a week of partying. Yeah, I was just so very ordinary. I was ordinary that I could never think of myself as other than that, and I don't want to, because that puts such incredible pressure on me. I want to think, here's the thing about Jesus, he likes to pick the ordinary, and if you think you're something, he'll deal with that. He'll humble you. You talked about that last night. He'll humble you. He'll show you you're not. Because what he likes to do is he likes to work in the lives of the ordinary to do exceedingly more than they could ask or imagine, and to take them to places that they could never have dreamed up on their own, and to do things through you, like write amazing worship songs that you know it was you but not you. That apart from the power of God, this ain't happening. That's the way God works. And actually, here's the thing. Jesus, when he opens your eyes, is not opening to, your awesomeness, so you are awesome. He's opening to, I am an ordinary person who God in his love has chosen as a son, as a daughter, and he is doing a thing in me that is exceedingly, abundantly more than I could ask or imagine. Second story in the calling stories is in chapter 3, near the beginning, and it's calling the bad guys, the sinners, right? His tax collectors, and then Matthew invites all of his riffraff friends over, and the religious people were pretty upset about it, and they say, why do you hang out with people? And Jesus says, you know what? I didn't come to I'm a doctor. I didn't come to sort of like just hang out with well people. I came to call the sick. And here's the sobering thing, is that Jesus picked you and me because we're sick. We're sick. Oh, I forgot to say, the ordinary, the single qualification you bring is yes. That's it. Here I am. Yes. The single qualification you bring is you want to get well. That Jesus says, do you want more than this? Is this working for you? I can heal that. Whatever that is. I can heal that. Do you want to get well? And Jesus takes people who are sick, and he not only over the arc of our lives, sometimes very quickly, other things it takes a while, he not only makes us whole, but in the end he makes us healers. The great spiritual writer Henri Nouwen called it the growth of a Christian minister. We become wounded. We ourselves had taken a bit of a wound, but the Lord has healed us, and now we heal others. So that's the story of I'm only picking sick people. Ouch. But what I show up with is, God, I'm sick of being sick. I'm sick of being stuck. Third thing is this marvelous passage in chapter 3, where he finally sort of handpicks the 12 guys he's going to hang out with for the next 3 years. And it says, and he went up on a mountain, he called to himself those who he wanted. There we go. Jesus went up on the side, called to himself those he wanted, and they came to him. Next verse, and he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and authority to drive out demons. So here's the thing, is that Jesus takes people who actually were passed over, forgotten. Nobody noticed them. Nobody was picking them for the team. The early disciples were probably the ones that the rabbis making their handpicks didn't want. And Jesus comes and says, I want you. He actually says, and those he wanted. Never, ever recover from this. You're here because Jesus wanted you. Didn't matter if nobody else did. It didn't matter if you got passed over in every other situation. It didn't matter if you're in a job situation and every time a promotion comes up, it's not you. you are here because you were the one Jesus wanted. And the first thing he wanted you for, it says, is he that you might be with him. Laura, I love this. You know why? Because the thing is, it says, not only does he want you, Laura, he's like, come. The first thing I want to do is just, can we hang out for a while? A huge moment for me in life and ministry was this, when I realized not just that Jesus loved me, but he likes me. Like, it's wonderful. I mean, I treasure that I'm loved by the Lord God, but that he likes me. Like, you got time today? Do you want to go and spend some, I called you and I wanted that you would be with me. And then it says, and that he might send them out to what? Preach. In other words, be an actual embodiment and a proclaimer of the gospel that saved you and is going to save others. And to drive out demons. You have an authority in Christ to deal with the mess. You don't have to run from that. It runs from you. Now, that takes a while for the disciples to learn, as we see in the Gospels. But eventually you get this place where you are so endowed with the authority of Jesus that, as Luther said in his song, the devil trembles when you get on your knees. Runs from you. The ordinary that God equips for greater works than even he does, exceedingly abundantly more than we ask or imagine. The sick who God makes whole and then heals. The forgotten, the passed over, the one who didn't get chosen, who Jesus himself says, I want you and I want you to be with me and I want to send you out. This is what Jesus opens our eyes to, that we would actually see ourselves in this way as the sons and daughters of God, that he loves as he loves because we're sons and daughters. I'll close with a story. About 10 years ago, I was in the troubled now country of Lebanon. And it was right, it had been a couple years since the Syrian war had happened next door to them. Actually, weirdly, Syria is probably one of the safest countries in the Middle East right now. But it wasn't then. It was just deeply troubled. And 3 million refugees had poured over the border from Syria into Lebanon. Lebanon is a tiny, tiny country. And it overwhelmed the systems, it overwhelmed the people. They were angry in Lebanon from the Syrian refugees. There is a Muslim population in Lebanon, but it's also in the Middle East, it's got the largest Christian population, and then another population called the Druze. And it was a crisis moment for the church in Lebanon, because they had to actually realize, are we just existing for ourselves, or do we exist for those who are persecuted, suffering, and war-torn? And for the most part, the church kind of woke up and began to do stuff. Well, we went over with the group we're with, we went over to this town right beside the Syrian border and met this incredible pastor who was just full of life, and the church there was thriving. And they were serving these refugees in the tens of thousands. This smaller church, tens of thousands, feeding them, clothing them, educating the children, helping the men find work, social programs. These Muslim refugees were coming to faith in droves. It was amazing. We met many of them. But I got to sit and interview the pastor, and it turned out before the war hit, he hated Muslims. Just hated them. His church was going nowhere. He had no vision for it. Tiny little group. And he was just an angry man. And then this crisis, and it was a crisis in his life where he realized that maybe God was calling him to something bigger. So he's an ordinary, it was such a small church that he actually had to work full-time to support himself, and then he did his church stuff on the side. This is before the crisis hit. Crisis hit, and God does a transformation in his life, just a total transformation. And he opens his eyes. He goes from sight to vision. And he starts to see what Jesus is doing in the midst of this war and disruption and these refugees, and his heart breaks. And then he starts to organize all this to the point where we see it. It's tens of thousands literally being helped, ministered to, coming to the gospel. The church has exploded, and they had just a little footprint, and they couldn't buy any more land around it, so they went up. It's 6 stories tall, a beautiful building. And so he tours all of this and takes us all the sites. I sit down finally with him again to have an interview, and he tells me more about this. But then I ask him this question. His name is Pastor Jihad. And if you know anything, that's the Arab word for holy war. Pastor Jihad. And so I said, in this context, working with Muslim refugees, is that name a problem? And he says this, no, not a problem. For, he says, I am fighting a holy war. I am. I do not fight it with hate. I do not fight it with weapons. I do not fight it with violence. I fight it with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then he quotes 2 Corinthians 5, because we no longer see anybody from a worldly point of view. We used to see Christ this way, and he says, and we used to see ourselves this way, but we do so no longer. He says, now we are ambassadors of Christ with a message and a ministry of reconciliation. He says, no, my name, jihad, holy war is not a problem because I'm fighting that war. And then he fixes me with a stare and he says, aren't you? Lord, open the eyes of our heart. Open the eyes of our heart that we might go from the blindness, the labeling, the boxing people in, that we might actually see, but especially that we might have your vision to see ourselves and to see others. God bless you.